Fall. I teach art and graphic design, including Photoshop and Lightroom, over at Iowa Western. I've been a professional photographer for, I don't know, like 15 years at this point. So I know my way around this kind of stuff. So today, let's get started with a program called Adobe Lightroom Classic. Now, something that can be unfortunate and very irritating for people when they first get started in, let me make that share correct. All right, we'll just do desktop, it's easier. Something that can be very frustrating the first time you start in Lightroom is that there's really two versions of it. So the version I've got going right now is Adobe Lightroom Classic. And then there's also Adobe Lightroom, I think they call it the Creative Cloud. And what that version of this program is basically a really clumsy, bad, the nicest review I've seen of it is highly apologetic for its shortcomings, port of a mobile app to the computer setting. But for whatever reason, Adobe is pushing that particular version of the program very hard. People who work with Adobe products professionally pretty much hate their guts for it because it causes a lot of problems. The version of Lightroom you want to download is called Adobe Lightroom Classic, not Creative Cloud Classic. Creative Cloud is bad. Don't use it. Don't mess around with it. Now, what Adobe Lightroom is for is it really is taking on the hat of two other powerful Adobe programs. One is called Adobe Bridge, and another one is called Adobe Camera Raw. So when we're in Lightroom, you'll notice that there's different modes, and the two big modes we'll look at are going to be Library and Develop, right up here in the top right corner. And if yours doesn't look like mine, if you right-click up here, you can show and hide different versions of the different modules in Lightroom. So Library is, if you're familiar with Bridge, is pretty much Bridge. Library and Bridge are pretty much the same thing. And then Develop and Adobe Camera Raw, which is part of Adobe Photoshop, are also pretty much, not 100%, but very similar, if almost the same thing. They serve the same purpose. And that purpose is to convert a raw file, so a file that's taken with a camera, that's one of the fancier ones. It's got all this extra data in it that makes for better editing embedded in it that a normal program can't, a normal image editing program can't access or use, and convert it into something usable and shareable. That isn't to say that you can't use it to edit regular image files, regular raster files, but that's what its specialty is. It's for editing these special raw files that all cameras produce. So when you're in Lightroom, the first thing you want to do is make sure you're in the library mode. So you just click on it if you're in one of these other ones. And then we're going to do something called import. So you can click the import button down here in the bottom corner. You can come up to go to file and go to import photos and videos, or you can get Command-Shift-I, Control-Shift-I, whatever operating system you're on. I'm on a Apple operating system, if you're wondering what the interface is. And you go to import photos and videos. You'll get a new window that looks something like this. And what this is for is either, in this case, bringing files off of some sort of external source. So that can be your phone, that can be a memory card, that can be your flash drive, anything like that, and moving them onto your computer and then telling Lightroom where they are. So like I've got a SD card for my camera plugged in right now. And if I wanted to, I could bring in, you know, some nice little flower pictures that I've got stored on there. And one of the big things that I want to talk about, if you're bringing it directly off your camera, you're using this to bring the files from that source onto your computer, is that you're going to be either copying it or copying as DNG. Unless you're weird and worried about proprietary raw formats disappearing or something like that, just use copy. So over here on the top left, you'll have your source, you'll have your movement methods. So in our case, if you're doing an external system, it'll be copy, and then where you're telling it to store those files. Now, if they're already on your computer, so like the files that you can download today, you need to tell it where you want to bring those photos into Lightroom. So right here, it says EOS Digital for me for that SD card, I'm going to click on it. I'm going to go to my desktop. And on my desktop, I have my Lightroom folder for the stuff that we are going to look at today. Now notice that when I switch to something that's already on my computer, so I'm taking from my hard drive, Macintosh HD, I'm going to gain a couple different things on here. So I gain add, which is the default one. I also gain move. So move, if I wanted to, would be just kind of like what I did with copy or copy with DNG. I can tell it where to put it on my computer. Or if I'm happy with where it is on my computer already, I'm just going to do add. And add is the important phrase for what's actually going on with Lightroom. So when you bring a photo into Lightroom, you're not actually bringing it into Lightroom. You're actually just telling Lightroom where it is on a computer. So when we're using these files on my computer or your computer and we're doing add, we're not moving the files, we're not changing the files. Lightroom's just going, oh, thanks, that's where they are. It's like a little library catalog. It's got like an ISBN number. You can pull it up and be like, oh, there it is, and find it for you. So this is an area where people can get in trouble after the fact. So if you bring them into Lightroom, a lot of people will then delete them from their computer, assuming they're stored in Lightroom. But that's not the case. Your photos are never stored in Lightroom. They're only referencing the location of them. So never delete those photos off your computer because they're not in Lightroom. You've just told Lightroom where they are. The other nice thing though is because it's referencing where they are, when we get to the part where we're going to start changing and editing pictures, it's never going to edit those originals. It will, when you're done, when you export out of Lightroom, it will make a copy of that original, and then wherever you put that copy will be a whole new file. So this is called non-destructive editing, and it means that your originals are always safe as long as you don't do something silly like delete them. So when we're in this window, by the way, we can do all photos to show, just to tell it to click, I want all of them. If I've imported some of them before, I can also tell it to sort out photos that are already in Lightroom. And then I have my thumbnail preview, which is where I'm in right now. And then I also have, if I can get the Discord thing to go away, there we go. I also have zoomed in view if I want to take a closer look at an individual file. The idea being maybe I don't want to bring one in and I need to take a closer look to make that decision. How I can sort them from already, and then how big I can make the thumbnails. Nice little slider right here to give me a good idea. I can also over here underneath file handling, do some kind of like pre-editing and pre-sorting. Right here, so the preview thing, this is basically how big of a preview it will build when it's going to be in Lightroom. And generally minimal is good because it takes up less room and it makes Lightroom faster. You can also build smart previews if you want to. I wouldn't, again, just because of space issues. And all a smart preview is kind of like an internal version of this image in Lightroom that allows you to, do edits on an image, even if the Lightroom doesn't know where it is. So I wouldn't do this, especially if you're just starting out. Don't import suspected duplicates is very handy. Always leave that on. And then during import, say like I was doing a wedding, so like with this woman right here, if it was like I was importing a whole wedding right now, I could in here embed in keywords to say for that wedding. And keywords we'll talk more about in a minute, but a good way to think about them is like Instagram tags and how easy it is to find them later. And then like if there's certain types of pre-editing that I want to do based on presets I've got. So let's say like I've got these this Canon colorimetric one right here, and this is a color profile for a light setup I had for an art documentation shoot. I'm going to be applying that to all of the images. So I could tell it then to apply that to everything when I bring it in. In this case, I want to do none. So once I've sorted all that out, I'll click import, and Lightroom will now learn where these photos are on my computer. So in library, the space will be set up just like this. And for any of this space, like if you've got a very low resolution screen, you can always free up screen real estate by clicking on any of the arrows in the four sides of the picture. So like I've got an arrow up here, I've got an arrow down there, I've got an arrow over here, and an arrow over here. And that's if I need, like I want to be able to really see just an image. And then now if I mouse over it, it will reappear as kind of a hover over. To keep things simple for us today, I'm just going to make everything visible permanently, just so it's nice and easy for us to reference as we go. Now across the top, we'll sometimes have tools up here once we get into develop. For now, we don't have anything. Over here on the left, we have our navigation, and then over here on our right, we've got our editing, basically, or in this case, applying keywords and things like that. So top left, we have our navigator. It's fairly straightforward. You can do fit, fill, one-to-one, as in like, show me this picture at full resolution. And then there's a bunch of preset zoom ins or zoom outs over here as well. Now, when I'm zoomed in, if I want to change where I'm looking at a picture, I can always click and drag on this navigator window to change where I'm looking at, or I can also just click and drag on the screen as long as I've got I double clicked. As long as I've got Mr. Hand right here, I can always click and drag around as well. So navigator is going to stay the same once we get into the editing section. Just like with these arrows right here, if I click this arrow, it goes away. Catalog is a really quick way to grab onto pictures. So this one is previous import. So that's currently the pictures that we just imported. If I hadn't made a special catalog just for this workshop, there'd be a bunch of numbers in here. So like all synced photographs, which is pretty cool actually. You can set up your phone version of Lightroom to sync with your desktop version of Lightroom. And all synced photographs will be like the ones that you took on your phone being synced onto your computer, which is cool. And then all photographs is fairly self-explanatory, all the photographs that are in Lightroom. For me, this is like 20-something thousand, so I don't often click on that one. But like for students, when I teach photo classes, you know, that'll get up into the mid-hundreds, high hundreds by the end of the semester, and that's still, you know, sortable through. So click the little caret, make it go away for now. Folders, so this is where it's located on your computer, and this is a way of moving files and still being able to have Lightroom know where they are, so you don't have to retell it where it is. So Macintosh hard drive, Lightroom right here. So like it knows where this folder is. And like I can also add in a new folder, add a subfolder like that. I can do my organization here for sorting out where all of my pictures are. Now, Smart Collections is really cool. So there's a way that I can add labels, internal labels to these pictures that isn't keywords or metadata, but I can set like a rating. So like if I click on an image and I hit 5, notice I set the rating to 5, there's now 5 stars underneath it. So that's like a picture I want to edit. And under Smart Collections, I can have it already has one built in, but anything that I've labeled 5 stars will be automatically added to this. So let's say, you know, I'm in a couple hundred pictures and I want to pull out my highlights for a portfolio. Any that I've labeled with 5 stars will automatically appear right here. Very, very cool. Catalog, all photographs. Now I've also got a bunch of other labels in here, so like red, and so basically color labels. And so those would be like 6 through 0. So like I can do 6 for red, 7 yellow, 8 green, and so on. And then I can also flag an image. So like if I right click on it, I can do set flag and I can do flag. And so these are just different ways. So like you see there's a nice little flag up there, stars, rectangles. See, these are just different ways of sorting out pictures. So again, if I was doing something like a wedding and I wanted to sort out, you know, formals from candids from ceremony, I would go, let me rephrase this, I have done it this way. This is how, when I shot weddings, I would go through and label those different sections by color. And then ones that I knew I wanted to edit and send to the client, I would label with 5 stars. Ones that I knew that I definitely didn't want to send to the client by accident, you know, like blurry, out of focus, ones with eyes closed, I would flag for deletion. And I'd go through and mark everything, mark all my 5 stars, and I'd pull out my shot list and make sure that all the ones that I really liked hit all the check marks that I had agreed to shoot in terms of pictures for the wedding. And then, you know, sometimes you'd have to pull out ones that aren't so hot to make sure you hit the full shot list. Welcome to life. So sorting that way can be very useful. And you don't always have to use Smart Collections to find those pictures. You can also come down here to this options bar going across the bottom above our film strip and instead sort by, you know, label text, file name, rating, color, whatever I want. And I can also do that by just straight up clicking on any of these. Like if I want to do by stars only, so like I've said 1 star or higher, now it's only showing me 1 star or higher, Or if I wanted just green pictures, I can do also just green pictures. And again, it's just a really quick and easy way to sort out pictures for editing and exporting later. Viewing pictures, I can double click on it to make it big. You can see that it switches from thumbnail to big down here. I can also do XY, which is comparing pictures. I can do multiple pictures from when I have like 3 selected. I can also do the hilariously disturbing auto face detect feature, which I can also go through and tag those individual people if I wanted to. It's resource intensive, so I'm not going to get that bad boy running. By the way, if you have questions as I'm going, go ahead and post them in chat, and I will see if I can answer them as we go along. And I'm going to check chat every so often as we go. So let's go back to this view. So again, just different ways of looking at and moving pictures around. For only having 6 pictures doesn't seem super useful, but when you're in my boat where you're in the 800,000 picture range or whatever I'm at, for like total, not just Lightroom. Lightroom, I want to say it's like 20,000. This sorting thing becomes very important. So let's talk about the right side of the screen. So we have histogram keywording, keyword list, metadata, and comments. So these are all very useful additions to that sorting thing. So when I pick on a picture, I get a histogram, and that shows me the distribution of tone. So we can see in this picture, I've got, let's do fit. I've got this big bright area right here. Here's that big bright area right there. Excuse me, I've got a bunch of dark blue tones in here. Here's those dark blue tones down there in my histogram. It's just where all the tones are in my image. And it can be useful for spotting things like this dog picture, which is very underexposed. But like if your screen brightness is bad, or you're not used to looking at pictures and parsing the data visually, you can also understand the data numerically over here in your histogram. You can see that almost all of my information in this picture is over here in my dark tones. And I don't even have any true white tones. Like in an ideal world, this histogram would be way further over here for this picture for editing. It's like over here in the bride picture, we can see like, here's that nice big chunk for her dress. Here's a nice big chunk for her face. And then here's that middling gray in the background. And it's a good way to be able to understand and look at pictures. So rather than relying on the brightness of whatever screen or viewer you're looking on, you can do it based on this histogram and really know if you've got what you need. The other really cool thing about it, it's also giving you your camera settings. So like you knew what camera settings you shot this on. So like I was hand holding this and I wanted the kind of softness of this lens and how much fall off there is around it. So it's at f2.8. 40 millimeters, it's a fixed focal length lens, 2000 of a second's pretty fast. It's probably shooting in aperture priority on top of it just to be lazy. Now, keywording is a way that I can add, something like an Instagram tag, or if you're at all familiar with web design, it's the same thing, keywords. So search words that I can use to find these pictures later. So like this is the Polgus Water Temple in California. So like keywords I would put in there would be like California. And you literally just click in here and start typing, comma, Polgus, comma, Polgus Water Temple. Maybe I'd put in reflection pool. Maybe I'd put in, what are those cypress trees? That's probably not what they are. I don't know what kind of trees those are. Roman architecture. And you hit enter and they all become keywords, which is a way that I can search for these pictures later. Again, when I have 6 pictures, big deal. When I've got 20,000 pictures, pretty big deal. Especially like if I'm gonna do something like build a wedding portfolio and I want to find, my best kiss shots. If I've put in kiss over here, it will bring up every single kiss shot rather than me having to click through each and every one of the weddings that I've gone through, find the kiss and see if it's one I wanna add to that, blah, 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 blah. As you use more and more keywords, it will start auto-detecting what keywords you probably want to use. Like if you use landscape a lot, and if you live in Nebraska, you probably type in landscape and then you would add Nebraska after that, or corn or whatever. Like Nebraska and corn would pop up down here as a clickable button to add a keyword as. Super cool. Something else that can be useful is the keyword sets. So again, they've got 2 built-in ones like outdoor, portrait, and like wedding photography. And then these are just single button ways to add, and you can see them popping up here, button clicks for more keywords. And you can also custom set up your own keyword list to better fit how you want to be able to find your pictures later. And then even over here, you can see how we have these different keyword filterings. And I can even add to this to add more ways of creating keyword tags. So super, super useful, especially down the road. Right off the bat, it seems kind of like a chore. This is something a photo teacher tells his students, you know, first year they're in photo, it's like, tag your pictures, you're gonna thank me later. 19 out of 20 of them never do. 5 years later, the one that tagged his pictures is like, oh my God, thank you so much. And then there's like the other 5 or whatever that you run into. It's like, I really wish I keyworded my stuff. It took me like 6 months to do like 2 years. You're like, yep. Something else to look at is metadata. So keywording can embed into metadata. Metadata is also going to contain all of the information that your camera embeds into it. So like EXIF data is that data. So like that exposure time stuff. Oh, look, I was an aperture priority. When it was taken, if I have GPS data, so if I have a GPS attachment for my DSLR, if I'm taking this with my phone, it will give the location that I took the picture. And then you can also put in artist information. So like, here's me, Regan Davis Poofall. And then under contact, here's Regan Davis Poofall. And then further down here in copyright, Regan Davis Poofall. And what this is a way of doing is for people who know how to look for this, which is going to be many graphic designers and photographers and people who license and buy pictures, are going to know to check EXIF to see if that data is there. So when your picture, you know, suppose it goes viral and wanders off onto the internet, somebody can now find you through that picture to find out whether or not that is something that they want to license. And this has literally earned me money in the past. So like my picture got licensed, like I got a picture that way licensed for Nebraska Gov and some other ones as well. So a very useful way of getting just like free exposure. Google also knows now to check for this information, and it will display your name underneath your picture when it shows up in Google search results, which, you know, usually I don't have nice things to say about Google and Alphabet, but good job there, guys, really. Super, super good job. All right, so that's library, again, organizing. Before we move on to develop, let's touch real quick on some of these other ones. Map will pull that GPS data I was just talking about, and we'll show you where you've taken all your pictures. So you can see all your road trips. It's really cute. Book is what it sounds like. It's a book layout program in Lightroom. If you literally have any other option available to you, use that instead of the book version in Lightroom. The book version in Lightroom is clunky and frustrating. Slideshow is also exactly what it sounds like. It's a way to make PDF or PowerPoint slideshows in Lightroom. If you don't have a Google account in Google Slides, I guess you could use this. But pretty much any dedicated PowerPoint or slideshow builder will be better. Print is also what it sounds like, a way to print out of Lightroom, decently useful. And then web is a way of building like a website layout for your pictures, or a way to integrate it with Behance, which is kind of a portfolio system that Adobe has. Again, if you have any other option, I would use that instead of web. So this is why I have it set up like this, because these are the only ones I ever use. So let's take a look at the fun part, develop. And let's go to the first image, this charming landscape with just, you know, that hint of little rainbow in there. So our layout's going to stay mostly the same. So we have over here now editing, and then we have organization over here again. But there's some new areas. So navigator is 100% the same. We have presets. Presets is exactly what it sounds like. It is a single button click to change the appearance of your image. And as you mouse over it, you can see how it changes things. If you do something like download presets from, what's it called, Visco or whatever those places are, like the film emulation ones, that's what these would show up. And how you add them is pretty simple. There's this little plus sign, you click plus, you go to import. We have in our folder a Rizzle-Dizzle. And if you import Rizzle-Dizzle, you'll see it appear under user presets. And when we go to Rizzle-Dizzle, you can see that it changes the appearance of our image. Now, people pay money for these. I don't know why people pay money for these, but they do. Because all it's doing is moving stuff over here for you. Like, it's not doing anything magical. It's just like it's somebody else's way of basically guessing like how you want to edit a picture, and they move some sliders around for you. That said, if there's a type of edit that you find yourself doing over and over and over and over and over again, you can make your own presets, which can be very useful. So, you know, like if you have a special preset for a particular lens distortion that you're correcting, go ahead and make a preset for it or something like that. But so, you know, like you can do some sharpening in here. You can add, you know, fake film grain preset. You know, there's a bunch in here. But, you know, let's say that this isn't my bag. So we're going to skip snapshots for a second. We'll come back to that later. History is a step-by-step change order for everything that I've done. So like I can go back at any point and always go back in time to my original or a different version of that as I was editing through this, which is really cool on the part of Lightroom. And that's going to also show steps, you know, when I start doing editing, you can see that stuff starts appearing over here. So I always have the ability to undo. However, if I undo and then I make a new edit, if you watch over here on the left, when I make a new edit, you'll notice that I lost those future steps. So I don't always retain the ability to redo, but I always retain the ability to undo. So let's say I get an edit that I really like, you know, like a black and white edit. I can save this edit so I can always come back to it later no matter what I do over here by clicking the plus sign and saying black and white edit. Then I can go back to my import and I can start changing things again, and over there I lost all that future stuff again. But I can then add a new one of these and label this one my color edit. And now I can always switch between these at any point. I never get those future things back, but it's a way to, if you want to look at it as your picture is like ingredients and this is your recipe, this is a way to have multiple recipes for a single image. So let's go back to the original one back at import. So this picture, it's a little overexposed up here, it's crooked. We wanted to make it a little bit punchier. So how do we go back? How do we go about changing this image? So over here on the right is all of our ways of editing the image. Our histogram stayed the same, except now it has these little carrots up here that if I can mouse over or click on, you can see that it's showing up as red and blue on here. And what that is where I've blown out my highlights and where I've chunked out my black. So you can see that on the histogram on either side of it. So generally when you're editing, you want to bring your highlights down far enough. I just clicked and dragged on here, by the way, to do this, to get rid of those red tones, or click and drag over here on my blacks to get rid of those blue tones, and still have a full range of tone, but, you know, mush it into the middle a little bit, because when you print later, the bottom 10 and the upper 10% of tones tend to just not print. So it's a way of warning you that you need to, you know, darken or brighten certain areas. And you can always turn those highlights back off, those warnings back off by clicking on them, and then, you know, preview them just by mousing over it. Go back to import because I'm going to do those edits a little bit differently in a minute. So right here, I have a bunch of ways of doing targeted edits. So real quick, we have crop, spot healing, red eye, graduated ND, circular ND, or radial, and then brush. So these three right here are targeted edits. This is a corrective tool. This is a tool to remove spots and stuff. And this is crop. So crop is fairly self-explanatory. You click on it, you get an overlay for rule of thirds or whatever you have it set to. I think it's up here in view, loop overlay, and then you can change, you know, whatever it's overlaying as. Is it loop overlay? It's up in here. You can change what the overlay. There it is, crop guide overlay under tools. You can change what it is. Like if you want golden ratio, you go to golden ratio, or, you know, whatever gives you a giggle. But for us, what we want to care about is over here in original, we have a bunch of preset aspect ratios. If I was trying to fit it into an 8x10 frame or a 16x20 frame, I'd pick this 4x5, 8x10, or 5x7, and so on. Or like if I wanted square, I'd go to 1:1. As shot is fine for us, which is 2:3. The big thing I want to do is this angle one. So we can see that this horizon is crooked. So if I was going to straighten that horizon out, I would need to click and drag on this, and I can eyeball it till I think it looks straight. But that's not any fun. An easier way to do it is to click the angle tool right next to it, and I get a mouse over that looks like the bubble level, And I can just click and drag from one side to the other and release, and it's straight, and then I hit enter and I'm done, like magic. And I can always come back into crop because again, everything in Lightroom is undoable, even if you don't want to do it in the undo history menu. So super useful. There's also auto where it's like guess straight for me, and it's like, that's not a bad guess. I think I like mine a little bit more like this. I can also reset it as well. Okay, so we're gonna look at healing brush, spot healing clone tool later. We're not actually gonna look at red eye tool or pet eye tool. I've literally never used this outside of a tutorial, but I don't use a lot of Flash, so there's that. But let's take a look at this GND tool. So a GND tool is replicating an old tool used by photographers called a graduated neutral density filter. And how you can think of it is like when you're sitting in the car and there's like that blue semi-transparent strip over at the top part of your windshield to make that part darker, and then the rest of your windshield is clear. That's a GND tool. So what we'll do is we can say, make it, one stop darker, and anywhere, and then I'm going to just click and drag on here, and I get, 3 lines. And so the top of this line up is going to be full effect, middle line is middle effect, and below the line is zero effect. So it's a way of correcting, and it's used mostly in landscape. It's a way for correcting how much brighter the sky generally is than the ground. But we can do more than just brighten or darken in this. We can also do all of these other tools in here, which we'll get to in a second once we get into basic. So it's a very powerful way to edit things. And you know what? I don't actually want to do a full stop. So I'm going to put in minus 0.75, hit enter, and then maybe bring these highlights down. Ooh, yeah, let's bring the highlights down by about minus 50. So again, you can always click and drag in these. You can type in a number. You can also type in, like divide by, ooh. You can also type in, you should be able to type in equations to get it to change things. You can in Photoshop. I haven't actually tried in Lightroom. But generally, you can type in equations to change things. We'll look at these other two. We'll look at this one in another picture, and we'll look at this one in a little bit when we get to that rainbow. So anyway, when I'm done with this tool, I can just click this to close it, or I can also click the close button, and it's gone. Now, if I want to be able to access that edit again, all I need to do is reselect that tool, click on that little gray square, and it's like magic, and it's back up. So basic slider, we have Adobe Color right here, or whatever it's labeled. These are different, ways that it's going to start your raw data. And you can click through them to see if there's one in here that you like more. You can also click this to display just them, and then you can do it as a quick mouse over to see the changes that it makes. To keep it easy for us today, we're just going to keep with color. And again, it's just how it's going to initially import that raw data. Temperature and tint. So like if you're shooting outside at sunset and it's yellow, but you want to make it pure neutral, you can balance that out. Same thing with tint. In our case, let's just warm this up a tab. Yeah, that seems pretty good. Just drag it over to the right a little bit. All it does is add coolness or warmness or greenness or magenta. Exposure, you can click auto and see what it does. Ugh. Maybe not auto. And then you have your sliders. So when I darkened the sky, I kind of dropped out that little bit of brightness, and the ground still seems a little dark to me. So why don't we increase the exposure by about 0.5? Yeah. And then we'll take the highlights and we'll bring those all the way back down. We'll bring the whites over a little bit, and we'll bring the shadows down a little bit. And we get, a nice little punchy picture. So why don't we go back to here, and you can kind of see the effect that that's having so far. Also, notice when I mouse over these, it mouses over it highlights different parts of my histogram. And when I go over my histogram, it highlights different parts of those. So I can always click and drag on that part of the histogram to move that particular slider if that's useful for me, and then vice versa. Moving down, we have what's called presence. Texture is exactly what it sounds like. It will try to accentuate or hide texture. So if you like your portraits to look like they are burn victims, here's your slider. If you like your old people to look like sandpaper, here's your slider. Clarity is a kind of micro contrast sharpener. I really like clarity. I wouldn't go more than +20 on anything just because it starts getting a little punchy. But you know, a 10 clarity never hurt anything. Dehaze is exactly what it sounds like. It's a tool for removing the effects of fog or haze in an image. It also kind of adds a lot of nice punchy contrast to an image if you really like that appearance. And it kind of tries to fake fog, but it doesn't fake it very well. You know, you can't really fake fog. For this one, I'm going to go ahead and pump the dehaze up by about 20. Because, you know, I think that looks pretty good. Next, I'm going to close Basic tab and we're going to take a look at Tone Curve. And for Tone Curve, I'm going to go ahead and make a snapshot and say my keeper edit. So I want to show you what this guy does. So I'm going to take it back to normal. Import. Actually, we'll go back to crop angle. There we go. So if you're very familiar with Photoshop, this is the curve tool on steroids from Photoshop. So I have my regional one, which allows me to make a fairly self-controlled S-curve, my normal curve, and then I can target individual colors to, you know, make it bluer or greener and so on through this curve. It's also a way of doing kind of some split channel editing. What I really want to talk about is if you click on this and you grab this little button right here, it allows you to pick a region and then target just the tones in that region. So I just grabbed the dark tones. I mean the bright tones up there. And like this dark tone, let's darken that. And you can see that it is a way of targeting certain areas of the picture just by clicking and dragging on it. And it will move these regions for me. And I can also make these regions biased one way or the other by moving these middle sliders in here. So let's say I want my dark region to be really dark. To really only grab those bottom tones, I can slide that over, versus if I had it way over here, you can see how it really starts chunking that stuff up. Don't have a lot of time to get into this today, but it's fairly advanced and it's fun. I can also just turn off any effect after the Basics tab by clicking this little box right here to make it go away. In my case, I'll go back to my keeper snapshot and collapse down my tone curve. Hue, saturation, color. So the HSL and color are giving you access to the same sliders. They're just grouping them differently. So HSL, all, here it all is. Hue is allowing me to change an individual color. Saturation is a color's vibrance, and luminance is brights and darks. So I'm going to actually just click on the color version. I'm going to go to green, and you know what? This isn't green enough for me. So I'm going to grab my hue slider, and you can see that it's changing that bean field to whatever color I want. And let's make it a little bit greener. So, you know, like +40, and that's a nice punchy green, maybe almost too punchy. Maybe drop the saturation down by like 10 or so. And I can also brighten or darken it with the luminance slider. Pretty fancy stuff. I really like it. Close that one down. Split toning. This is for like that Instagram style editing where if you like want, you know, like a certain color for your highlights, you can be like, make it yellow and make my dark tones blue and then crush out my blacks. Like it's an Instagram filter basically. I'm not a huge fan of it. Detail. We'll get into detail on this picture. So we'll come back to detail in a minute. Lens correction. So this is all lenses have a certain amount of distortion built into them. It's just kind of how they're, like, they don't do it on purpose. In fact, they usually try to correct for it, but it's just how the lenses work. So you can remove what's called chromatic aberration with a button click. This used to be like a hours long task, depending on what the picture was, like 5 or 6 hours or like an hour at least to fix. Now it's a single button click. Let's see if we can find some chromabs in this picture. Might be hard to see. If you look, when you download this on your own version, you might see some purple fringing over here. And when you click remove chromabs, you won't be able to see this in a Streamcast version. You'll notice the purple fringing go away. This is a nice enough lens that like it's just not going to show up that badly in this. And then profile corrections will try to undistort the image. So the famous mustache distortion that this lens has, the 16-35, you can see how it tries to flatten that out. And then the fall off or the vignetting from the camera also gets removed. And this one I would say is up to taste. So whichever way you like, you can do. If this isn't automatic, so like you're using a weird camera lens, you'd have to go into manual and kind of do it by eyeball. Doing it manually is not fun. So if your lens profile is missing right here, well, basically good luck. Have fun trying to get it in manual. There's tricks to it. You can Google it, but they're not easy. Transform, we'll take a look at in a minute with this third picture. Effects are basically if I want to add back in a vignette. The controls are fairly self-explanatory. This has largely been replaced in usefulness by this radial filter tool, which we'll take a look at more in a second. And then calibration will be something that you hopefully never have to touch, but it's a way of how it's going to understand and bring in the RGB tones from your camera sensor. But chances are you'll never have to mess with this. All right, so not a bad edit on this landscape. It's a little crunchy up here. Let's take a look in our remaining 18 minutes or so, some of these other things that we want to address. So let's start by opening up this wedding picture. And let's take a look at this healing brush tool. So I'm gonna click on the healing. Oh, actually I forgot something. I almost forgot the brush tool. So let's zoom in real quick on that rainbow and take a look at that rainbow and grab the brush tool. Ooh, almost forgot. So when you click on the brush tool, notice how you get, something fairly similar to the basics tab. You also get brush size, like how big your brush is. My brush is going to appear ginormous, by the way, because I have an enlarged mouse, so it's easier for you guys to see. But you can basically, long short, you can change the brush size by sliding on this. Feathering is how soft the edge is. Generally, you want it fairly feathered. Flow is like that's exactly what it sounds like. It's like how much is it flowing? So like how wet your paintbrush is, if you're familiar with that. Auto mask, so like if I'm painting, so like I'm just gonna paint right here, and you can see how everything gets dark. If I turn on auto mask, it's going to try to figure out what edge I'm trying to not paint over. And so notice right now how it's not affecting the ground, but only affecting the sky. It's building an auto mask. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than nothing. For us, let's turn off that auto mask. Let's get this brush a little bit smaller, turn that feathering back up. And I'm just gonna paint over that rainbow. And you know what, exposure -1 is not what we want. What we want is saturation. Get that saturation up in there, and you can see how that punches up that rainbow a little bit. Now, if I was really gonna do this, I'd be fairly careful about only going over the rainbow itself and not the sky around it to kind of avoid that blue fringing. But with the giant mouse, that's just not something that's doable. All right, so now let's take a look at this healing brush tool. So let's go to this bride. Hi, bride. And you know what? You've got some skin imperfections that make me unhappy, like pimple scar, mole. There's another mole down there. So let's remove them. So I have two ways of using this tool. I have the heal version. What the heal version does is you're gonna click somewhere, it's gonna look at the stuff around it and go, I think this is what you want. And it will copy from somewhere else and blend those two spots together. Clone does the same thing, except it doesn't look at the stuff around it. It just copies over. So let's try one real quick. So we've got, a earring scar right there. Boop. And so you can see there's the spot that it's copying to. There's the spot that it's copying from. And like magic, it's gone. You can see that this one copied from over a hair. So it's copying a hair over. It looks a little goofy. So I'll just drag this over until I don't have the hair in there, and like magic, it's gone. Click, picks from over there, that's fine. Like magic, it's gone. Oh my goodness, oh, grab the hair again. Let's move you. And like, it's creepy. And like, if I ever want to change these, I always just click back onto them and, hit the delete key to get rid of it, or, adjust it however much I need to from there. While I'm using this, I can also turn on the visualize spots tool and slide this bad boy around. And this is really useful for finding, sensor dust in an image. This one, it's not going to be doing too much. Let's see if there's any in this guy. Yeah, there's a little bit right there. So we can come back through and it helps you spot dust on gradients very easily. In our case, it's not super useful on this bride picture. Zoom in, Command plus, Control plus, drag down, and you know what, you can go away and you can go away. Now there's limitations to this. So like if I wanted to try to remove this part of the necklace, you can see that it's not going to be able to do it smartly or intelligently or usefully. This is where you'd have to open it up into Photoshop to really be able to deal with this issue. But that said, this tool is terrifyingly powerful. So let's say I wanted to get rid of this eye. I'm just going to click and drag to paint over this eye. And, you know, that's the wrong spot to pick from. Why don't you take off that forehead and, you know, kind of terrifyingly, it's like, bye, Mr. Eye. You know, you can also use it to remove things like these hairs. So let's get you nice and small and just paint over this hair and release. And it removes that hair fairly successfully. Now, if I wanted to copy and paste over, this is where I would use that clone tool. And, you know, I could paint over the other eye. So I want to clone this. Oh, I'm doing this backwards. I want to actually flip these. So I'm going to bring this over here now. And then where it's copying from down on her neck, let's bring that over this eye. And that allows me to copy over that other eye. And again, notice how, since I'm in the clone mode, it's not going to try to blend this edge in. So that's the big difference between clone and heal. That said, when I'm doing this goofy eyeball thing, I can also use the feather to soften the edge to kind of help blend it into place if I want. I can also use, I don't have it active, excuse me. I can use opacity to make it less opaque, and then I can feather the edge to kind of help blend it in that way if I want to. So it's not like it's not 100% perfect, but it's still, you know, interesting and goofy. Fun little way of dealing with, you know, man, that looks weird. Not that weird though. Fun little way of removing things. And it's fairly powerful, but again, like right here, it has that kind of limitation to it where it's not going to be able to do everything perfectly. All right, let's take a quick look at the detail slider. So here is a nice picture of Anzo Borrego. And, you know, adorably, if we look up here in the top, we can see there it is. Hi, Andromeda Galaxy. We're going to be one galaxy one day. Andromeda is going to smash into us one day. Anyway, hi Galaxy, bye Galaxy. You can see that this is a fairly noisy image, and it's already got a little bit of noise reduction applied to it. So if we go into detail, you can see that it's going to be applying by default a little bit of noise reduction in there to try to make it better. So like when I slam this color down, you can see that all this nasty color noise appears. Which there's two kinds of noises. We've got our luminance noise. So right now you can see this kind of pebbling texture, maybe not on the stream, but when you download the image, you'll be able to. Or when I turn this color noise down, you can see these RGB colors start appearing in here, and that's color noise. And generally the default for color noise will be fine. Now to reduce this luminance noise, you just drag the slider up and down. However, as you remove more of that noise, what it's going to do is kind of apply a smear to try to smooth out that texture. So the picture starts losing clarity. And you can see that, you know, the picture is lacking that noise now, but it almost looks like, you know, like a grease painting that's been, you know, smudged. You can try to retain some of that detail with the detail slider, and you can try to increase the contrast that you're losing from doing that smear with the contrast slider. But it's never going to be as perfect as if you had not shot at a high ISO. And as I recall, this is at like 3,200 or 5,000 ISO. So it's fairly noisy image. That said, you know, it does a pretty impressive job of trying to maintain detail while getting rid of that underlying noise. Not perfect, but fairly impressive. Last tool I want to take a look at, we'll go back to the Pulgus Water Temple, is the transform tool. So this tool will allow you to not only fix that tilt like we did with the crop tool, but it will also allow you to fix keystoning. So like I'm looking slightly up at this building, so it's not straight on. So like when you look at like a tall building and it looks like the lines at the top, the edges of it would meet somewhere in the far distance from linear perspective. This is a way for removing that linear perspective. And I can do it, you know, by slider, or I can grab the overlay tool for it. Just click on this, and I get a targeted windows. The first one I'm going to do is I'm going to do one for the pool edge, and this will give me my flat horizon line. And then I'm going to do ones for the building. So I'm going to pick, and the columns are slightly tapered, so I got to kind of come slightly off to the side on these. Right about there. And then I'll do one more over here. About there. Again, the columns are slightly tapered, so just ever so slightly off to the side. And like magic, here I'll turn this on and off so it's easier to see. The picture is straightened and the keystoning effect is fixed, and it gives this kind of much more professional, very appealing appearance to the image. So again, super powerful, super useful. There's also a bunch of good things in here to remove with those healing brush tools. Like there's a bunch of leaves in here. There's that drain marker over there that you'd want to pull out. If you're ambitious, some of my students are ambitious when I teach them with this program, you could try to pull out those telephone lines in the background, which is fairly difficult to do. All right, so these are all cool pictures, right? How do you share them with people? You got to get them out of Lightroom. So how do we get these bad boys out of Lightroom? Simple. You go up to File and you go to Export, or if you're in the Library tab, you get a full-on export button. And whatever pictures you have selected down here is what you will export. So let's say I wanted to export the 4 that I had done today. I'd click on the first one, hold down the Shift key and click on this 4th one, and I've got all 4. Say I wanted to add one to the dogs, I could hold down the Command or Control key, I think, on Windows, and I can add in the selection or take one off. So let's say I didn't want this noisy nightscape. I could use that to turn that one off and just export these 3. Then you click Export, and you can see I've got a bunch of presets right here that I like to use a lot. But basically what you need to do here is first tell it where you want it to go. And almost always you want it to go to hard drive. And then on your hard drive, where do you want it to go? So when you set up a preset, or even if you're not, I would almost always do choose folder later or same folder as original photo, depending on however you like to organize your stuff. So like I like to have a separate folder that I put web-sized edits in for sharing. So I do choose folder later. And then ask like if it has a same file name thing, what to do. File renaming, I always do like to do file renaming, and I like to do date file name. Makes it super easy to find later. But you can do, like if you're sending it to a wedding, so like you can do custom name sequence, you do Frank's wedding or whatever, and it will renumber them for you. So like when they see, you know, file numbers getting skipped, they're like, where's that picture? I want to see it. And I'm like, well, that's the picture where, you know, whatever, I just thumb up his nose and the other guy was blinking. So you didn't send it to them. So date file name is the one I usually like to use. Video, you'll probably never use. File settings. So file settings is the big one. If you're going to share it on the internet, JPEG, sRGB, 100. When you first pick JPEG, it sets this to like 60 or something for some reason. Just set it to 100. I don't know why they do that. So JPEG for sharing on the web, sRGB for sharing on the web. If you're sending it to a printer that's good, send them a TIFF and send it to them in Adobe RGB. Otherwise, chances are you'll never need to use any of those other ones in there. Some people will tell you to use PNG, ignore them. You don't, chances are you'll never want to send it as a DNG because that's not going to save your settings. PSD is a Photoshop file, and then original in our case would be the raw file, and that wouldn't, raw and DNG aren't going to save our edits because you can't actually directly edit those kinds of files. And TIFF is just a nice big beefy file that has a lot more color information, which would be good for printers. Anyway, JPEG for sharing on the internet, sRGB, everyone will be able to view it. Image sizing, I like to do resize to fit. And then you've got a bunch of options in here, so you can set it based on megapixels or percentage size, or like you can hardcore enter in the dimensions, or same thing with width and height, you can hardcore enter those in. Just do long edge. And then for sharing on the web, you want to do either 1200 or you want to do 900 if you're particularly really nervous about stuff getting stolen. Both of those resolutions are small. Both of them aren't very good for printing, but they're about the right size for a screen. Resolution doesn't really matter these days if you're sharing it on the web, but if you really want to put something in, put in 72. If you're sending it off to a printer, put it at 300. Sharpening, if you didn't do your sharpening in the Develop tab, you can do kind of a standard sharpening after it resizes it. Screen, standard or low would be my advice, depending on the picture. I would avoid high. And then these other ones are for if it was going to be printed, but this is not a good way to do that. Metadata, if you're nervous about people knowing who you are, remove person info. It seems kind of pointless to me because my goal is to be easily found if I'm trying to sell pictures, so I leave that on there. If I have GPS data, I do like to remove that because I don't want them to know where I took the picture, and that's creepy. And then writing keywords as Lightroom hierarchy can be useful. And then you can see right here, like I can also do just copyright only. So just how much information you want embedded in the picture. Watermarking, that's a whole other subject on whether or not you want to watermark your pictures. I say no, but if you want to, you can set up a watermark and do that. There's plenty of YouTube tutorials on that if that's your gig. Post-processing, aka what happens afterwards. You can tell it to open it up in Photoshop. You can tell it to show it to you in Finder or Windows Explorer or whatever it's called on Windows computer. So you can access the file right away. Like when I do use this instead of Adobe Camera Raw to edit in Photoshop, I'll send it to Photoshop quite often. Usually do nothing is what you want. And once you have this set up in a way that you like, and you're going to use a lot for sharing on the web, rather than trying to remember all this, you can click Add, and you can be like Web Export. And then you click Create, which I don't want this on here, so I'm not going to. And then you can just click on it as a single button click. So where's my web? New for web. And there we go. All my settings are correct. And I click export, and it spits it out, and it's done. And that will make, again, just as a reiteration, because this is the thing that gets people in trouble, your photos aren't in Lightroom. You've told Lightroom where they are on your computer. When you edit them in Lightroom, there's no saving it. Remember, it's just like Minecraft. It remembers where you were at any point. So I can close Lightroom and all my edits aren't going to go anywhere. And I can open it back up and there's my edits again. And then when I click export, it will look at my original file, take the edits that I've made and apply it to a copy of that original file, and then spit that copy out wherever I've told it to in the export window. So my originals are always safe. There's no real saving in Lightroom. It just remembers where you are. And if you want to share it, you got to export it, and the export is a copy. Now I've only got a minute or two left. If you guys have any questions, this is your chance. Otherwise, it's been great, and I hope to catch you guys at some of these future webinar workshops, or it sounds like in-person classes are going to be coming back soon to do space. So keep peeled in your emails and Facebook for new classes and webinars that show up. Anyway, it's been good. Have a nice night.